Your support helps us grow. Hit the subscribe button and join our community today. You can't even afford a car, so shut your mouth, my dad sneered. The family laughed while I sat there in silence. Then a thunderous roar shook the windows. It was like something landing the lawn. I stood up, smiled, and said, I want to show. My name is David Bennett. I'm 26 years old, and if you asked me to describe my life, I'd probably say it's like a long, winding jazz composition, full of unexpected high notes, soft melancholic pauses, and melodies that only I seem to truly understand. I live in Buffalo, New York, a cold city where blizzards can swallow whole streets, but it's where I grew up and where every memory still lingers like snowflakes pressed against a window pane. Right now, I live alone in a small, modest apartment on the edge of the suburbs, not too far from downtown, close enough that I can hear the wind howling through empty streets at night. It's where I compose, where my music is free to breathe without judgment, at least for now. I'm the middle child in a pretty typical American middle-class family. 3 of us siblings, my older sister Natalie, 4 years ahead of me, then me, and my younger brother Connor, who's 2 years younger. We weren't wealthy, but we never really went without anything essential. My dad, Harry Bennett, works as a manager at a local car manufacturing plant, always surrounded by spreadsheets and production schedules. He still lives in the house we grew up in with my mother, Janet, a high school math teacher who believes life should be approached with the same precision as her equations. They're practical people, always pushing for safe plans and secure futures. Natalie lives in New York City and works as a lawyer for a big Manhattan firm, expensive suits, high salary, the kind of success other people openly admire. Connor's in Albany working as a tech engineer, brilliant guy who treats code and algorithms like old friends. My parents proudly brag about both of them to anyone who will listen, but I've always been different. From the time I was a kid, I've been deeply, almost desperately in love with music, not casual humming, but composing. Melodies creep into my head in the dead of night. Lyrics spill out that describe joy, despair, or stories I've never even lived. I still remember the first time I picked up my grandfather's old guitar when I was 8. It was a summer afternoon filled with golden sunlight streaming through my grandparents' window in Buffalo. My grandfather, Raymond Bennett, is the one who lit that spark. He used to play saxophone in old jazz bars in Manhattan back in the day, never a big name, just someone who loved music enough to play all night long. His stories about Greenwich Village, cigarette smoke swirling while saxophone echoed through the rooms, captivated me. Music isn't a job, David, he used to say with a soft smile. It's the soul. If you follow it, it'll take you further than anything else. My grandparents still live in a small house on the rural outskirts of Buffalo, not far from my parents'. It's quiet there, big yard, old apple trees. My grandmother, Barbara, is a gentle soul, always baking or tending her garden. When Grandpa played the saxophone, she'd sit nearby and listen with that peaceful smile. She didn't say much about my music, but she supported it more than anyone. Follow what your heart tells you, dear, she would whisper. They were the light in some of my darkest moments. The rest of my family, though, saw me as the impractical dreamer, the one smudge on their otherwise perfect picture. Even as a kid I felt it. Natalie was showered with praise for her grades and awards. Connor got early coding classes and equipment. Me? Whenever I spent hours on the old piano in the living room, Dad would shake his head and say, David, focus on schoolwork. Music is a hobby, not a future. Mom was harsher. She'd point to Natalie and Connor and say, look at your sister. She's already a lawyer. Connor's about to be an engineer. And you're just strumming that guitar. How will you support yourself? Those words cut deep, but I never fought back. I stayed quiet and swallowed the tears. Let me paint a clearer picture with one evening I'll never forget. I was 17. It was a winter family dinner, heavy snow falling outside the window. We were eating Mom's roast and mashed potatoes. Natalie had just come home from college, proudly announcing she'd landed a NYC law firm internship. Dad patted her shoulder and beamed, that's my girl. That's a real future. Connor talked about a robotics project and Mom lit up with pride. Then it was my turn. Nervously, I said I'd just finished composing a new piece inspired by Grandpa's jazz stories and sang a few lines. Dad immediately frowned. David, you're doing it again. Music isn't a career. I don't want my son wandering around like some hippie. Mom sighed and said she was worried about me and that I needed a practical direction. Natalie laughed softly and suggested I learn a real trade. Connor stayed quiet, but the pity in his eyes said enough. I felt like a stranger sitting at my own family's table. My chest was full of anger and sadness, but I finished dinner in silence and asked to be excused. Moments like that kept happening, and slowly I pulled further inward, like a discordant note in their carefully orchestrated symphony. I don't resent my sister or brother, I genuinely love them, but that constant dismissal made me question whether I even belonged there. Only my grandparents truly understood. After dinners like that, I'd grab my bike and ride through the freezing air to their house. Grandpa would open the door, hug me tightly and say, "Come in, kid. I've got the sax ready." We'd sit in their warm living room, fireplace crackling, and play together, me on guitar, him on sax. Our melodies blended like a warm embrace. Grandma would bring hot tea and cookies and listen with that same gentle smile. "You've got real talent, David," Grandpa would say, eyes shining. "Don't let anyone dim that light. I missed my chances in Manhattan because I was afraid, but you're stronger than I was." Those words were medicine, and over time the loneliness I felt turned into determination. I started spending more and more time with Grandpa, soaking up every bit of his wisdom. He told me stories about his years in Manhattan, playing in legendary jazz spots like the Village Vanguard where giants like Miles Davis once performed. "Music is an adventure, David," he would say. "It'll take you places you never imagined if you're brave enough to let it." I wrote everything down and began composing my first songs, pieces about snow drifting through Buffalo, about loneliness, and about dreams that felt bigger than the city itself. Grandma sewed a small bag for my instruments and always prayed for me, quietly reminding me I wasn't alone. When I turned 18, everything shifted. It was the summer after high school, the snow finally gone and Buffalo just starting to turn green again. I sat in my room staring at a stack of college applications, technical schools, business programs, all the safe options my parents had carefully chosen for me. My heart pounded at the idea of spending years in classrooms studying things I didn't care about while my head was flooded with music I desperately wanted to write. That night, I stayed up late with my guitar beside me and wrote a sad melody about a boy trapped between dreams and expectations. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to college. I was going to pursue music, even if it meant walking straight into a storm. I told my family over Sunday breakfast, Natalie visiting from New York, Connor scrolling on his phone. My voice shook but I said it anyway, "I want to pursue music. I'll find work and compose." Silence. Then Dad exploded, red-faced, slamming his hand on the table. "Are you crazy, David? Music isn't a career. What are you going to do, play on street corners?" Mom's eyes filled with tears. "You're breaking our hearts. Your sister and brother have real futures." Natalie chimed in, condescending. "I'm saying this for your own good, people fail chasing dreams like that." Even Connor told me to reconsider. The words sliced through me, but I tried to explain, "It's my passion and Grandpa says music is the soul," but they wouldn't hear it. Dad pointed at my face and shouted, "If you drop out, get out of my house." Mom cried. Natalie shook her head. Connor stared at the table. I ran outside, tears streaming down my face, and rode straight to my grandparents' house. Grandpa opened the door, hugged me hard, and listened as I poured everything out. Then he smiled and said, "You made the right choice, kid. Music isn't easy, but stay determined and you'll make it. I believe in you." Grandma stroked my hair and brought tea, and they became my anchor in the middle of that emotional blizzard. That evening we played together, Grandpa on sax, me on guitar, and the sound wrapped around me like a warm blanket. He gave me old music books from his Manhattan days and told me not to fear failure. I moved out the next week into a tiny apartment in the Buffalo suburbs and started waiting tables for money. Grease in my hair, feet aching, but every night I composed, scribbling melodies on scraps of paper. My family didn't stop. Mom called every day, worried but disappointed. Dad told me he was ashamed. Natalie sent money with passive-aggressive advice. Connor suggested I learn to code. Every call left me anxious and doubting myself. The first 2 years were nothing but struggle, late rent, instant noodles, rejected compositions, crying alone in the dark wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. But my grandparents lifted me up each time. Grandpa texted me encouragements, "Don't let fear stop you. They love you, but they don't understand." Grandma sent food and slipped me a little money. Slowly, things began to shift. I wrote better songs, played in local bars, earned a bit of cash. The tension at home was still tight, but I grew used to the rhythm of that difficult life. Then one winter morning everything shattered. Heavy snow blanketed Buffalo and I was wiping diner tables when my phone rang, Grandma's trembling voice, "David, come to the hospital, it's your grandpa." My heart stopped. I dropped my apron and ran, tears streaming as I prayed the whole bus ride. When I arrived, Grandma sat in the hallway pale and shaking. My parents were there too, looking stunned. The doctor came out, shaking his head. We did everything we could, but he didn't make it. I stood there frozen, unable to breathe. My grandpa, my mentor, my friend, my inspiration, was gone forever. The funeral took place a few days later in a small church in Buffalo, and the air felt bitterly cold, even beyond the weather. My parents stayed silent through the entire ceremony, their expressions stiff and unreadable. Natalie flew in from New York, gave me a quick, polite hug, and sat down without a word. Connor stood nearby with his head bowed, offering no comfort. Only Grandma and I cried. She held my hand with trembling fingers as if losing Grandpa meant a piece of her own soul had been taken away. I hugged her, feeling how fragile she was, and wondered how I was supposed to keep going without the one person who truly believed in me. My family didn't understand. After the service, Mom pulled me aside and whispered, heavy with sorrow, "David, do you see now? Your grandfather spent his whole life on music, and what did it give him? No fame, no money. You should reconsider your path." Her words felt like a blade and I couldn't even respond. I just wanted to run somewhere I could finally break down. In the days that followed, I drifted through life like a ghost. I stopped going to work, stopped composing, and just sat in my dark apartment watching dust settle onto my guitar. Every night I dreamed about Grandpa, heard the soulful cry of his saxophone, saw his smile, and heard his voice whisper, "Keep going, David." But I couldn't. It felt like music had left me too. One evening I went to Grandma's house carrying Grandpa's old saxophone. She sat alone in her armchair, eyes distant, and said softly, "I miss him, David, but he'd want you to keep going. He believed in you." I hugged her, tears blurring my vision. Later that night, I opened my laptop and looked at the unfinished songs I'd written. One piece, inspired by Grandpa's jazz nights in Manhattan, caught my eye. I revised it, wrote lyrics about loss and love and dreams that refused to die, and called it Saxophone in the Snow. I posted it online with no expectations, just to honor him and keep him alive inside me for a little longer. Then something unbelievable happened. A few days later, I woke up to hundreds of shares. By the end of the week, it was thousands. Comments poured in, "This made me cry. This reminds me of someone I lost." Streams climbed into the millions. I stared at my phone in disbelief. A song written from pure love and grief had reached people all over the world. One morning, while making coffee, I got a call from an indie singer in New York. "David Bennett, I heard Saxophone in the Snow. I want to buy the rights to record it. Are you interested?" I almost dropped my mug. They offered enough money to cover my rent for an entire year. I said yes, still shaking. Then more calls came. Another artist wanted a custom track, a small record label offered a contract. It felt like everything Grandpa had talked about was finally unfolding. But I didn't tell my family, not yet. I only told Grandma. I went to her house with a bouquet of flowers and explained everything. She smiled and said, "Your grandfather is so proud of you, David." But I also noticed she was starting to forget things, calling me by the wrong name and repeating questions. I was worried, but in that moment I just wanted her to feel happy and for Grandpa, wherever he was, to know I was honoring his legacy. The next 6 years were a quiet journey, like a slow jazz melody played in a dark room, heard only by me. Saxophone in the Snow opened a door I never expected. After that first deal with the indie singer from Brooklyn, more offers poured in. I wrote songs for indie bands in Chicago, for young pop singers in Los Angeles. Every contract became another brick in the foundation of my career. I worked tirelessly, waiting tables during the day to pay rent and composing at night under the dim glow of a yellow lamp, surrounded by a MIDI keyboard and handwritten sheets covered with music notes. I taught myself how to negotiate contracts, protect my rights, and navigate the industry without a degree or mentor. Slowly the money began to trickle in, then pour in. A song I wrote for a Nashville artist made it onto the Billboard Hot 100. Another composition for an independent film was nominated for Best Original Score at a small film festival. My bank balance grew from a couple $100s to thousands, then tens of thousands. By the end of the third year, I signed a major deal with a New York record label to compose for a famous singer's album. The first royalty check they sent was for $500,000. I sat alone in my apartment staring at the check, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I wanted to scream, to call someone, but I realized that besides Grandma, no one in my family would actually care. I didn't brag. I kept living simply, staying in my old Buffalo apartment, driving a 10-year-old pickup truck, eating instant noodles when I was too lazy to cook. I didn't want to change. Didn't want to become someone else just because of money. By the time I was 26, my net worth had surpassed $25 million thanks to royalty deals and smart investments in music funds. But I kept it a secret. Not out of arrogance, but because I knew my family wouldn't believe me or worse, would say something to hurt me. On the rare occasions I visited home, they still saw me as a failure. Dad would ask, "Still waiting tables, David? When are you getting a real job?" Mom would sigh, "Sweetie, I'm so worried. Look at Natalie. She just bought an apartment in Manhattan." Natalie, now a senior lawyer, would text asking if I needed to borrow money. I just smiled and thanked her politely. I poured my love into Grandma. I visited her weekly, bringing flowers, pastries, or sometimes a vintage jazz vinyl that Grandpa loved. We'd sit in her garden under the apple trees listening to Ella Fitzgerald or Miles Davis. I told her about my new songs, my contracts, my dreams coming true. She'd smile, her eyes lighting up. "David, you're making me and your grandfather proud. He's listening, you know." But then I noticed she was forgetting more. Once she called me Raymond, Grandpa's name, and asked, "Why don't you play the saxophone anymore?" I laughed gently, correcting her, but my heart ached. Another time, she told the same story 3 times in an hour, unaware she'd repeated herself. I grew worried and took her to a doctor. They diagnosed early-stage Alzheimer's. I stood outside the clinic, my hands clenched, feeling like I was losing another piece of my soul. "No, Grandma, I won't let you be alone," I promised myself. I started changing my plans. I didn't just want to write music anymore. I wanted to take care of her to give her the best life possible. I quietly began searching for real estate, contacting architects, and planning a place where she could live comfortably and safely. But I kept it a secret, even from her. I wanted it to be a surprise to show her that her dreamer grandson had achieved something big. Meanwhile, my career kept soaring, but I stayed in the shadows. I wrote under the pseudonym E.B. Snow, inspired by saxophone in the snow. My songs played on the radio, in movies, and commercials, but my family didn't know. Once I heard Mom humming one of my songs on the radio in the kitchen. I wanted to say, "Mom, that's my song." But I stayed silent, afraid they'd laugh or not believe me. I didn't need their validation anymore. At least that's what I told myself. All I wanted was to care for Grandma, the only one who always believed in me, who was slowly being robbed of her memories by Alzheimer's. I knew I had to act to create a place where she could live safely and happily before the disease took her smile away. I began quietly planning the biggest project of my life. With over $25 million in my account from royalty deals, I decided to buy a mansion in the suburbs of Buffalo, a place with clean air and tranquility. Far from the city's noise, I found a 3-story house built in the 1920s with a sprawling garden, apple trees reminiscent of Grandma's house, and a small pond glimmering under the sun. The house was old, but I saw its potential. A place where Grandma could live comfortably, well cared for, and where I could stay close to protect her. I hired a top-tier team of architects from New York, instructing them to renovate the house into a cozy, safe space for an elderly person. I wanted everything to be perfect. Grandma's bedroom had to have large windows overlooking the garden, an elevator so she wouldn't need to climb stairs, a bathroom with anti-slip handrails, and a music room with a state-of-the-art sound system so she could listen to Grandpa's jazz whenever she wanted. I imagined her sitting there smiling as she listened to Miles Davis's Kind of Blue, just like she did when Grandpa was alive. But I didn't stop at the house. A bold idea sparked in my mind, inspired by an experience from years earlier. When I was 22, I treated myself to a helicopter ride over Buffalo for my birthday. As the helicopter glided over the Niagara River, past twinkling buildings and snow-covered fields, I felt a surge of inspiration. New melodies flooded my mind as if the sky had opened my soul. I wrote a song right after that flight and it became one of my biggest hits at the time. Recently, when talking to Grandma's doctor, he mentioned that sensory-stimulating experiences like viewing scenery from above could help slow memory decline in Alzheimer's patients. The idea hit me like a bolt of lightning. I decided to buy a helicopter, a brand new Bell 407, with room for me, Grandma, and a nurse. I wanted to take her flying over Buffalo, over the fields, over the old house she shared with Grandpa, so she could smile, even if just for a moment, as memories flickered back. And deep down, I hoped the flight would inspire me, as it once did, to write new music carrying Grandpa's spirit. I contacted an aviation company in New York and purchased a sleek black Bell 407 for $3.4 million. I took a basic helicopter piloting course, but hired a professional pilot to ensure safety. I also assembled a team of nurses, housekeepers, and security guards to care for Grandma 24/7. I chose the most dedicated people. A retired head nurse who had worked with Alzheimer's patients. A chef who could cook Grandma's favorite traditional dishes like apple pie and potato soup. And 2 security guards to ensure absolute safety. I wanted her to live like a queen, free from any worries. Every step of the preparation was done in secret. I didn't want anyone in the family to know. Not my parents, not Natalie, not Connor. I wanted it to be a surprise to bring Grandma to the new house as a gift to show her that her dreamer grandson had achieved something grand. The preparations took 6 months, and each day filled me with growing anticipation. I visited Grandma regularly, bringing vinyl records or telling her about new songs. But my heart grew heavy as I saw her forget more. Once she looked at me, hesitating. "David? Or is it Raymond? Who are you?" I held her hand, smiling. I'm David, Grandma, your grandson. She nodded, but her eyes were distant. I knew time was running out. I worked tirelessly, composing to keep the money flowing while overseeing the mansion's renovation. At night, I sat in my apartment reviewing the house's blueprints, imagining the day Grandma would walk in, see the music room with Grandpa's saxophone in the corner. I wrote a new song, Sky for Grandma, inspired by the future flight with her. Its melody was gentle, like drifting clouds, but full of hope. I wanted her to hear it on the helicopter as we flew over Buffalo. But deep down, I was afraid. What would happen if my family found out about my plans? What would they say? Mock me again, call me delusional. I remembered the last time I visited home when Mom looked at me with pity. David, are you still waiting tables? Why not get a stable job? Natalie sent a long email urging me to retrain for an office job. I didn't blame them. They didn't know about my career, about E.B. Snow, about the songs playing worldwide. But their words still stung like salt in an old wound. I told myself, as long as Grandma is happy, I don't need them to understand. One evening, I drove to Grandma's house, bringing a wool scarf I'd bought from a vintage shop like the one she used to knit. She sat in her armchair looking out at the garden, clutching a photo of Grandpa. David, you're here, she said, her voice faint but warm. I told her about a surprise gift I was preparing without revealing details. She smiled. You always surprise me just like your grandfather. I hugged her, feeling her fragile warmth, and vowed to myself, Grandma, I'll give you a home, a flight, and the happiest days. Everything was nearly complete. The mansion was ready, the garden neatly trimmed, the music room fully equipped, and the helicopter parked at a nearby private airfield. I hired an assistant named Lisa to help manage details and support my work. I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety like standing before the biggest stage of my life. Only one step remained, bringing Grandma to the new house. I imagined her walking in, seeing Grandpa's saxophone, hearing Sky for Grandma playing and smiling like she used to. But then a call from Mom shook everything. David, come home this weekend. Her voice was serious. We need a family meeting to discuss Grandma. My heart pounded, a bad feeling creeping in. I knew this meeting wouldn't be simple. What did they want? To criticize me again, or worse, to decide Grandma's future without my input. I gripped the steering wheel, thinking of the mansion, the helicopter, the dream I'd built for her. No, I told myself. This time, I won't stay silent. That weekend, I drove my old pickup truck to my parents' house in downtown Buffalo. It was October, and a cold wind carried the scent of dry leaves and the crisp chill of autumn. I wore a worn denim jacket, faded jeans, and dusty sneakers. The kind of look my family always called dirt poor. I kept my appearance simple, not to hide anything, but because that's my style, and I didn't need to prove anything to them. The mansion, the helicopter, and my career were secrets I reserved for Grandma, not for flaunting to people who never believed in me. I walked into the house, greeted by the smell of roast meat and mashed potatoes wafting from the kitchen, just like every family gathering before. Mom was setting the table. Dad was in his armchair reading the newspaper. Natalie had just flown in from New York, dressed in a sharp business suit, and Connor was scrolling on his phone, earbuds dangling. Grandma sat quietly in the corner of the living room on her old armchair, clutching Grandpa's framed photo. Her eyes were cloudy, staring into the distance as if lost in memories. I walked over, knelt down, and took her hand. Grandma, it's me. She smiled weakly, whispering, David, or is it Raymond? My heart ached, but I just stroked her hand. It's David, Grandma. I'll take care of you. No one in the room noticed that moment. They were too busy with themselves as always. Dinner began awkwardly. Mom set a plate of food in front of me, her voice tinged with worry. David, you've gotten thinner. How's work? Still waiting tables? I nodded, not wanting to argue. It's fine, Mom. Dad snorted, folding his newspaper. Fine. You're 26, David. Look at your sister and brother. Natalie just got promoted. Connor's about to lead a team at his company. And you still dreaming with that guitar? Natalie chimed in, her tone sweet but laced with sarcasm. Little brother, I know you love music, but you should get a real job. I could hook you up with a legal assistant position. Decent starting pay. Connor smirked, eyes glued to his phone. David, I could teach you to code. It's way easier than strumming a guitar. I bit my lip, trying to stay calm, but my heart raced. Their words cut like knives, bringing back memories of when I was 18. When they pressured me to abandon my dreams. Mom changed the subject. Her tone serious. We need to talk about Grandma. She can't live alone anymore. Her Alzheimer's is getting worse. Last week, she forgot to turn off the stove and nearly burned the house down. I looked at Grandma sitting silently, her fingers tracing the photo frame. No one asked her opinion. No one even looked at her. They talked about her like she was a problem to solve, not a loved one. Dad nodded. Exactly. I found a nursing home in the suburbs. Clean, modern, affordable. We'll split the cost. Natalie agreed instantly. I'm on board. I'm too busy to care for her. A nursing home is the best solution. Connor nodded. I think so, too. I'm in Albany. It's not practical for me to travel. Sending her there makes the most sense. I clenched my fists under the table, blood rushing to my head. They spoke so casually as if it were obvious, but I heard the indifference. No one wanted the responsibility. No one considered Grandma's feelings. I tried to speak, keeping my voice steady. Grandma doesn't want to go to a nursing home. She wants to stay with family. Dad cut me off, his tone sharp. Family? Whose family? Yours, David? You can barely take care of yourself. How are you going to care for her? What do you live on? Waiter tips. Natalie giggled, covering her mouth as if I'd said something absurd. David, little brother, don't be ridiculous. Caring for her costs money, time. What do you have besides that guitar? Connor added, his tone softer, but still mocking. I know you love her, but be realistic. You can't handle this. Mom sighed, her eyes tearing up. David, sweetheart, I know you love Grandma, but you don't understand. Caring for her is a huge burden. It's best to leave it to professionals. I sat there feeling suffocated. Each word was a stab, digging into old wounds. They weren't just belittling me. They were dismissing Grandma, the woman who raised Dad, who held me through my loneliest days. Grandma sat there silent as if she didn't exist in this conversation. I looked at her, saw her trembling hands, and my heart broke. I wanted to scream to tell them about the mansion, the helicopter, the $25 million I'd earned. But I held back, not out of fear, but because I wanted to act, not argue pointlessly. Finally, Dad concluded. So, it's settled. We'll send her to the nursing home next week. I'll handle the paperwork. Natalie nodded. I'll send money monthly. Connor added. I'll chip in, too. I looked at them, feeling like I was in a play where I didn't know my role. I stood up, my voice trembling, but firm. I'll take care of Grandma. The room went silent. Then, Dad burst out laughing, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Don't make me laugh, David. You can't even take care of yourself, let alone Grandma. Connor looked at me, his expression half pitying, half skeptical. I stood there, my heart pounding, deeply hurt. Their words weren't new, but today they stung more than ever. They weren't just doubting me. They were deciding Grandma's fate without her input. I looked at Grandma, saw her gazing at Grandpa's photo as if searching for him in her fading memories. I couldn't let them do this. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and called Lisa, my assistant. Lisa, get the helicopter ready. Bring it to the field near my parents' house now. I spoke loudly, deliberately, so everyone could hear. They stared at me, then burst into laughter. Dad clutched his stomach. A helicopter? Have you lost it, David? You think you're a billionaire now? Natalie covered her mouth, giggling. Little brother, you should write movie scripts instead of songs. You'd have a better shot. Connor shook his head. David, stop joking. Get serious. Mom looked at me, worried. David, are you okay? Do you know what you're saying? I didn't answer. I just looked at Grandma and smiled. Grandma, I told you I'd show you something amazing. She looked at me, her eyes hazy but with a faint spark as if she sensed something. I stood up, grabbed my jacket. You can all laugh, but in a bit meet me at the field. I walked out, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and anger. I knew in just a few minutes everything would change. I stood on the sports field a few blocks from my parents' house where kids usually played basketball and soccer on weekends. The October wind cut through the air sharp and cold, but I felt nothing except the adrenaline surging through my veins. I checked my watch. Lisa, my assistant, had confirmed the helicopter was on its way from a private airfield 20 minutes outside Buffalo. I imagined the roar of the engine, the sleek black Bell 407 landing, and the stunned faces of my family. After years of being belittled and mocked, this was the moment I would prove myself. Not to boast, but to protect Grandma, to show them I wasn't the failure they thought I was. 30 minutes later, like a jazz tune reaching its climax, the sound of an engine rumbled in the distance. It started as a low hum, then grew louder like the heartbeat of the sky. I looked up and saw the helicopter appear, gleaming under the pale sunlight. It was a masterpiece, a glossy black body, powerful spinning rotors, exuding strength and majesty. It landed on the field, the rotor wash kicking up dust and dry leaves, creating a small whirlwind. Nearby kids stopped playing, their mouths agape. I stood tall, hands in my pockets, trying to look calm, but my heart pounded like it might burst. My family rushed out of the house, drawn by the noise. Dad led the way, his face flushed, muttering, "What the hell is this?" Mom followed, clutching her chest, eyes wide. Natalie, still in her sharp business suit, froze mid-step, her phone slipping from her hand. Connor stood stunned, his earbuds falling to his neck, mouth open. And Grandma, supported by Mom, looked at the helicopter with a mix of surprise and confusion. I walked over, took her hand. "Grandma, I told you I'd show you something amazing." She smiled faintly, whispering, "David, is that you?" I nodded, my eyes stinging. I turned to my family, my voice calm but firm. "Everyone, get on the helicopter. I'm going to show you something else." Dad laughed loudly, but it was a nervous laugh. "David, you rented this? Where'd you get the money? Stop joking." Natalie chimed in, her voice shaky. "Little brother, renting a helicopter costs a fortune. How could you afford this? Who's behind it?" Connor muttered. "David, is this your helicopter?" Mom looked at me worried. "David, don't do anything reckless. Give it back. You can't afford this." I didn't respond. Just opened the helicopter door where the pilot and nurse were waiting. I helped Grandma aboard, fastened her seatbelt, and turned back. "Dad, Mom, get on. Natalie, Connor, follow in your car. I'll send the address." My parents exchanged looks, their faces pale, but they eventually boarded, perhaps out of curiosity or not wanting to lose face in front of the neighbors gathering to watch. Natalie and Connor, still shocked, stood frozen. The pilot started the engine. The rotors spun fiercely, and we took off. Grandma sat beside me, gripping my hand, her eyes lighting up as she looked out the window. "David, are we flying?" she asked, her voice childlike. I nodded. "Yes, Grandma. I'm taking you to see Buffalo." The nurse sat behind, smiling, checking medical equipment to ensure Grandma was okay. I looked down and saw Natalie and Connor rushing to Natalie's sleek BMW. I sent Connor the address to the mansion via text. As the helicopter soared over the Niagara River, over misty fields, and over downtown Buffalo twinkling with lights, I felt inspiration surge just like that first flight years ago. I looked at Grandma, saw her smile pointing at the river. "So beautiful, David. Your grandfather loved this river." I squeezed her hand, tears welling up. That moment was worth everything I'd sacrificed over the past 6 years. But my parents were different. They sat across from me, their faces tense. Dad spoke up, his tone skeptical. "David, where'd you get the money to rent this? Did you borrow it? I'm not bailing you out." Mom clutched Dad's hand, worried. "Sweetheart, tell the truth. What did you do to get a helicopter? Are you mixed up in something shady?" I sighed, turning to them. "Dad, Mom, I didn't rent it. This is my helicopter. I bought it." Dad laughed loudly, but his eyes were uneasy. "Bought it? Are you crazy? You're a waiter. How could you afford a helicopter?" Mom shook her head. "David, don't lie. I'm so worried." I didn't argue. The truth would speak for itself. The helicopter landed in the garden of the mansion, a magnificent 3-story home with a red-tiled roof, large glass windows, and apple trees surrounding it. Natalie and Connor arrived by car shortly after parking at the gate, their eyes wide as they took in the house. I helped Grandma down, the nurse following, and led everyone inside. Staff stood at the door, bowing. "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett." Dad muttered, "What is this? Whose house is this?" Natalie gasped. "David, you rented this, too? Are you making a movie or something?" Connor just stood there looking around in disbelief. I led my family into the spacious living room where a fireplace crackled, casting warm light on the cream-colored walls. In the corner, Grandpa's saxophone stood proudly on a wooden stand next to a state-of-the-art sound system softly playing saxophone in the snow like a greeting from the past. Grandma looked at the saxophone, her eyes lighting up briefly. "Raymond's," she whispered. I held her hand, smiling. "That's right, Grandma. This is your house and mine." My parents, Natalie, and Connor stood frozen, as if they'd stepped into another world. I turned to the housekeeper, a middle-aged woman with a professional smile. "Anna, please ask the chef to prepare a lavish meal for my family, and bring out tea and pastries first." Anna nodded. "Yes, Mr. David. I'll arrange it immediately." I invited everyone to sit on the luxurious leather sofas arranged around a large walnut table. Grandma sat beside me, still clutching Grandpa's framed photo, her gaze hazy but with a hint of peace. I signaled the nurse to stay close, ensuring Grandma's comfort. Dad sat across from me, his face still pale, hands clenched as he tried to process what was happening. Mom clutched her purse, her eyes scanning the room from the paintings on the walls to the sparkling crystal chandelier. Natalie glanced around, her expression a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Connor sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the saxophone. Anna brought out a silver tea tray, setting down steaming cups of tea and a plate of buttery cookies I knew Grandma would love. I poured tea for Grandma and turned to my family. Please make yourselves at home. I have something to share. Dad cleared his throat, still trying to maintain authority. David, what's going on? Where did you get the money for this house? The helicopter? Did you take out a loan shark? Natalie cut in, her tone sharp. David, be honest. Whose house is this? What did you do to afford this? I'm a lawyer. I know things like this aren't simple. Connor muttered something I couldn't hear. Mom gripped Dad's hand, staring at the room in awe. I took a deep breath, feeling like I was standing before the biggest stage of my life. This was the moment to open up. Not to brag, but to make them understand. Understand me. Understand Grandma. Understand the dream they once mocked. I'm not involved in anything shady, I began, my voice calm but firm. For the past 6 years, I've lived off music. I compose under the pseudonym E.B. Snow. You've heard Saxophone in the Snow on the radio. Right. I wrote that for Grandpa. It went viral. And from there, I signed deals with singers, bands, and film studios. I've written for artists in Nashville, Los Angeles, New York. Songs in commercials and movies, many of them are mine. I've earned over $25 million from royalties and investments. This house, the helicopter, the staff. I bought them all to take care of Grandma. Silence engulfed the room. Dad's mouth opened, but no words came out. Mom covered her face, tears streaming down. Natalie sank into the sofa, muttering, no way. E.B. Snow is you. Connor looked at me, his eyes wide. David, you really did it. That song, you wrote it? I nodded, pointing to the saxophone. It all started with Grandpa. He taught me to believe in music, to stay determined. I made it because of him and for Grandma. Dad stood up, paced a few steps, then turned back, his voice trembling. David, if everything you're saying is true, I'm sorry. I always thought you were a dreamer, that you'd fail. I didn't know you'd done all this. He bowed his head, something I'd never seen. Mom rushed to hug me, sobbing. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I thought you were struggling, that you had no future. You've made me so proud. I hugged her, feeling a weight lift from my heart, though the years of being belittled couldn't be erased in a moment. Natalie, for the first time in her life, looked at me with respect instead of pity. She spoke, her voice emotional. David, I never thought music could do this. I always saw it as a hobby. Thought you'd fail like so many others. I was wrong. You're incredible. I smiled, nodding. I don't blame you, Natalie. I just wanted to do what I love and take care of Grandma. Connor was different. He stood, walked to the saxophone, and touched it like it was a treasure. David, he said, his voice choked. I've always wanted to pursue music, too. I play guitar, but I was scared. Scared of Mom and Dad's criticism. Scared of being mocked like you were. I chose tech for safety, but I'm not happy. I looked at him, seeing myself 10 years ago, and walked over, placing a hand on his shoulder. Connor, if you really want it, I'll help you. Music isn't easy, but if you're passionate, I'll be here teaching you like Grandpa taught me. Connor nodded, his eyes red, and for the first time, I saw him smile genuinely. Anna returned, announcing that dinner was ready. I led everyone to the dining room where a long table was set like a royal feast. White silk tablecloth, flickering candles, and an elaborate spread prepared by the chef. Beef Wellington, lobster salad, mashed potatoes with creamy mushroom sauce, and warm apple pie. Grandma's favorite. We sat down and for the first time in years, the family atmosphere was intense. Grandma, despite her hazy memory, smiled as she tasted the pie. Like the ones I used to make. I held her hand, whispering, I learned from you. The meal passed with stories. I shared more about my journey, the sleepless nights composing, the rejections, the moments I thought I'd give up. My parents listened, nodding occasionally, their eyes shining. Natalie opened up about the pressures at her law firm, admitting for the first time that she felt overwhelmed. Connor shyly shared about the songs he'd written in secret, and I promised to listen to them. For the first time, we talked like a family without judgment. After dinner, my parents, Natalie, and Connor prepared to leave. Natalie hugged me, whispering, I'm proud of you, David. Connor shook my hand. Thanks, man. I'm going to try for real. My parents hugged me longer. Mom was wiping tears and whispering, You're our pride, as she and Dad climbed into Natalie's BMW, waving from the window as the car pulled away from the gate. I stood there watching them go, feeling a strange mix of relief and emptiness. When I turned around, Grandma had already been gently helped by the nurse into her new bedroom. I went in and found her sitting quietly by the window, gazing out at the apple orchard. David, she said in a soft, fragile voice, you remind me so much of your grandfather. I sat beside her and played Sky for Grandma over the speakers while she held my hand and smiled. From that day forward she officially lived in the mansion, cared for by nurses, chefs, and housekeepers, and I moved in as well so she would never be alone. Every day I played music for her, told her stories about Grandpa, and walked with her through the garden even as her memory slowly faded. Deep down I knew she still felt my love, and in those months, though always shadowed by sadness, I experienced some of the happiest days of my life. The mansion truly became a home for the two of us, every hallway echoing with music and love. Each morning I woke early and walked with her through the orchard. She loved picking an apple, even though the nurse worried it might upset her stomach, and she'd smile mischievously and say, "I want to taste youth again." I'd hand her a small slice and tell her another story about Grandpa playing saxophone in Greenwich Village or laughing until tears rolled down his face when he got kicked out of a club for playing too passionately. Sometimes she would nod and softly ask, "Raymond really did that?" And even if I knew she'd forget the story minutes later, her little smile made it all worth it. Most afternoons I brought her into the music room where I'd set up a perfect sound system and proudly displayed Grandpa's saxophone. I played old jazz records, Ella Fitzgerald, John Coltrane, Miles Davis, and she'd sit in her armchair with her eyes closed, swaying her hands to the rhythm. Once, she even sang along to Summertime, her voice faint but clear, as if all her youthful memories had come rushing back, and I sat next to her, gently strumming my guitar, harmonizing like we used to when Grandpa was alive. Those moments were so beautiful I wished I could freeze time forever. Whenever the doctor said she was healthy enough, I arranged helicopter flights, flying over Buffalo, across the glittering Niagara River and the snow-covered fields. Grandma would point out the window, eyes glowing, and once she softly said, "That's the house where Raymond proposed to me." I knew it had to be a true memory, she rarely remembered things so clearly, and I squeezed her hand, whispering, "I know, Grandma. Grandpa loved you more than anything." Those flights didn't just make her happy, they inspired me. High above the earth, new melodies flowed into my heart the way they did after my very first flight. One time, after landing, I sat at my desk and wrote a new song called Above the Snow, a soaring piece about timeless memories, and it became a hit for a famous singer in Los Angeles, rising quickly on the Billboard charts. Every time it came on the radio, I smiled and thought of Grandma and Grandpa. Over time, my family changed, too. After our difficult confrontation, they began reaching out more sincerely, without sarcasm or pity. Mom started calling every week just to ask how Grandma and I were doing. Natalie stopped telling me to become a lawyer and instead texted, "Your new song is incredible, I listened to it 3 times." Connor visited often and, one day, shyly brought his old guitar. He played a song he'd written, and I saw real talent in him. "Connor, this is good," I said. "You should submit it. I'll connect you with a label." His eyes brightened. "You really think I can?" I nodded. "Absolutely." In that moment I saw myself at 18, full of passion but afraid, and I silently promised not to let him go through what I did. That Christmas, I hosted a gathering at the mansion, not to show off, but to mend what had been broken. The chef made a beautiful feast, roasted turkey, warm pudding, and apple pie for Grandma. The living room glowed with a towering Christmas tree and a crackling fireplace. Grandpa's old guitar rested beside his saxophone, a quiet symbol of everything he left behind. My parents, Natalie, and Connor arrived early, carrying gifts and wearing genuine smiles. Mom hugged me and whispered, "You've made me proud, David." Dad patted my shoulder and said, "I was wrong. You're the man of this family." Natalie laughed as she handed me a fine bottle of wine. "Looks like you've outdone me, little brother." Connor gave me a Charlie Parker vinyl and said, "I want to learn from you." We ate, talked, laughed, and for the first time in years, I truly felt like we were a family again. Grandma sat at the head of the table wearing the dress I bought her, smiling even when her eyes occasionally clouded with confusion. After dinner we gathered by the fireplace and I picked up Grandpa's guitar, letting its warm old wood settle into my hands, and played saxophone in the snow. The room became completely silent, only the gentle, hopeful melody filled the air. Dad lowered his head, Mom wiped tears, Natalie held Connor's hand, and Grandma looked at me with eyes full of light, as if Grandpa were standing right beside her. When I finished the last note no one spoke, but I could feel the love all around us. A little later, Connor quietly sat beside me and asked, "David, will you teach me?" I smiled and showed him the first chords while Grandma watched, her face glowing. "You and that boy," she said softly, "you're so much like Raymond." I hugged her and for a moment it felt like Grandpa truly was there, watching over us. Firelight, the guitar, and Grandma's gentle smile, that was the most perfect scene I'd ever lived. My story ends here, but its message keeps echoing in every note I play. Staying true to your passion, even when the world turns its back, is how you find the light. And even when family bonds break, forgiveness and love can mend them again. I looked at Grandma, saw memories flicker gently in her eyes, and knew deep in my heart that I had lived exactly the way Grandpa wanted, guided by music, by love, and by family, all the way through the blizzard to a place called home.